Well, Leonard, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. How are you?
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me.
And it's absolutely our pleasure. We love to have some of these just lifetime ship members just bestow wisdom onto all of us about this wonderful organization and your impact there. But can you first give us just a brief introduction for anyone who doesn't know who you are here?
Sure. So my name is Leonard Abeyta. I am an electrical engineer. Was my undergraduate, and I worked as an electrical engineer for about 6 years. Went back for my MBA for the University of Texas. So University of New Mexico is my undergrad. University of Texas is my MBA. Branched out a little bit out of engineering, but has always stayed close in the technical space. So I've focused around technology and worked in some great companies. Worked with, AT&T, Verizon, Microsoft, Meta, Adobe. It's a long list of great companies.
Wow.
Um, my involvement with SHIP dates back to the late 1980s when I actually was a member of the Hispanic Engineering Organization. And I'm also a 3-year national board of director representing Region 3 there as a vice president back in that time when after I graduated from college.
Yeah, so much great stuff to get into. Let's rewind the clock a little bit. Tell me about where did you grow up and how did you first get interested in STEM?
Sure. So I grew up in a small community, 10,000 people in Espanola, New Mexico, predominantly Hispanic community. I think, when I grew up, I would jokingly say I thought, Hispanics were the majority because there was
Right.
nothing else. There was Native American, Hispanic, and that was about it. And then I opened when I moved to the big city of Albuquerque and decided to go to school at the University of New Mexico. And it was quite a bit changed in terms of pace and culture and such. Like got motivated to go into engineering probably when I think back as to what was the driver for me was a couple things. I was fortunate to have the opportunity to go to the Los Alamos to work at the Los Alamos National Laboratories as a summer intern in 10th and 11th grade. That was a program called the Student Summer Science Program, and that really motivated me to kind of think about science and engineering as a possible career path. And then my cousin had married, her husband was an actual electrical engineer working for Intel. So those two factors, I guess, were kind of major contributors to me thinking about, I like science, I like math, we're fairly smart guys. Let me give it a shot. I wasn't sure, right? Like anybody else, it's a big jump going from this small town to college to probably majoring in probably one of the more difficult course loads that you can have at a university. And
And did you start out with electrical engineering? Was that your first path?
I was, yeah, I I would say that when I first got to college, like everybody else, you take a broad base of classes, and
Right.
I thought, legal might be kind of interesting. So I think 2 legal type classes, and it wasn't for me. I got I got bored pretty quickly reading case studies and
Sure.
a lot of legal documents. I was like, this would be fun, but probably not something I want to do for the rest of my life.
Mhm.
So I continued down my path of getting ready to kind of get into the engineering program.
And so going in, you start taking broad classes, you have some engineering thoughts, the legal thoughts. I think we all can sympathize with we don't want to read case studies for the rest of our lives. We're grateful for people who do. But I also fell in that category for sure. Actually, I didn't even go down that path much, but um
Yeah.
I did want to ask a little bit as you're going into college and deciding what you want, particularly when we talk to younger engineers, there's so many different categories of engineer that you can end up focusing on. What drew you specifically to electrical engineering, and what advice might you have for others who are in that discernment process?
Yeah, it's a great question. If you think back to the timeline in the 1980s, semiconductors were some of the biggest things out there in terms of technology. This was well before big data and AI and those other things. It was really just silicon chips and such. And as I mentioned, my cousin had married had married into had married an engineer, and he was working at Intel and was working as one of those types of engineers. I was like, that sounds kind of fun. So I think originally I thought I was going to actually probably go work at an Intel, and work in that space. So I think that kind of helped me to think about which discipline to go into.
Hmm.
I wasn't so sure about going into nuclear or mechanical. Mechanical didn't sound too interesting. Civil, I looked at civil and I was like, I don't want to be out standing by some road for hours at a time and, those kind of things. To me, at that time, working around chips and things like that was going to be a more sexier thing for me. So that was kind of my decision point.
Yeah, and I think it's good advice to be, kind of look into it, kind of picture yourself in each of those fields. Like, all right, I don't see myself standing on the side of the road. Civil engineering might not be me for me. And it's exactly what you said. What's the sexiest path for me? What feels like something that I will keep coming back to? I think it takes some figuring that out. And oftentimes for, speaking for myself as well as many other people that I've had the see, this is why I do a podcast. Uh, speaking for myself and for many of the other ship members that I've talked to, sometimes it takes us some trial and error, and it's fine to totally change courses too. And so you're in the University of New Mexico, coming from the area that you grew up, where you are not at all a minority as a Hispanic student. How did that change when you got to the big city?
Well, Albuquerque still has a pretty significant
Right.
population of Hispanics, but the school itself uh, did not necessarily, and
Mm.
then the engineering program even less so. So let me kind of backtrack a little bit. In terms of Espanola, Espanola, where I grew up, is a very poor community. Uh, it relies, but it does provide the lifeblood to the Los Alamos National Laboratory. So a lot of
Mhm.
great people that live in Espanola work at the Los Alamos Labs. So uh, I was always fascinated by that. And I think,
Yeah.
when I had the chance to go work at the Los Alamos Labs as an intern, that really got me excited about the space. But even when I was kind of going, I don't know, where we go do these field trips as part of those two summer opportunities, I noticed that most of the scientists that I met were not Hispanic.
Mm.
And when that kind of troubled me a little bit. And I think that was also another motivating force. So, as being the first person in my family to go to college, I thought, hey, if they can do it, I can do it. And so when I went to the University of New Mexico and I looked around and I saw, I didn't see too many people that were Hispanic that were in the program. I was like, I can do it. I was like, if it's not me, then who? And that's kind of been my whole approach. Even when I got my MBA, I looked at one time at the stats for, let me pause that for a second. When I went to the University of Texas and decided to go for my MBA, I looked at the stats of Hispanics graduating with an MBA, and it was small. It was like 1.1% of all MBAs were awarded to Hispanics.
Mm.
So again, that kind of provided me the motivation to kind of pursue my MBA. It gave me the drive and the initiative to prove that those sayers wrong. So that's been kind of my approach, and I think that's why I decided to pick electrical engineering and push through the program, even though it's hard. I mean, my school
Yeah.
is the very bottom in terms of the quality of education, unfortunately. Again, it goes back to income
Mm.
and those revenues being able to support the school system. I was lucky to kind of get out with what I did. So I had to play catch up quite a bit.
Yeah, and I think that's a really great perspective that you bring to that, because there's a lot of conversations within SHIP around the idea of representation, meaning being so important, right? And seeing someone in the field that you want to go to who looks like you, to help you be inspired to get there and surpass that point for your own self and your own career and your own trajectory. And I love that you can also take sort of the opposite as well. It's like, okay, well, I'm recognizing as I get to Albuquerque, there are less Hispanics. It's still a lot of Hispanics, and then in the school there's even less, and in the engineering program even less. And recognizing that, okay, well, if someone's going to do it, I can do it. And I think that's such a beautiful mindset, and it speaks so well to the level of success that you're able to ultimately obtain, because it's equally as true as if they can do it, I can do it. It's equally powerful, or maybe even more so, particularly for you, to say, well, if not me, then who? And I love that approach to the whole thing. And so I really wanted to just take a second to highlight that part of your mindset at that point in time. And you mentioned that you were in your undergrad, you got involved with. Remind me the name of the organization, because
Yeah, so it was a SHPE chapter, but it was called the Hispanic Engineering Organization.
okay,
It's called HESO. They've added the HES in there, so I think it's the Hispanic Science and Engineering Organization. But back in my day, it was HEO, and that organization, like I say, was a lifesaver for me because we
yeah,
had a really great mentor in the program, ran great events, great community, and I think that's the whole spirit of SHPE, right? SHPE has always been
yeah,
very focused on familia, and it goes back to those days, right? We all banded together, we helped each other. It really helped us to kind of, quite frankly, graduate. Really, we leaned on each other quite a bit. So I will be the first one to tell you that I didn't do it by myself. Um,
right,
I have some great friends that I actually still chat with. Last night we were talking about the New Mexico Lobo basketball game.
yeah,
Two of those guys I was chatting with last night are friends from like HEO days.
yeah. And so we talk about how like you can take on this like if not who, if not me, then who mentality, but it is still impactful to have that community of people who are pursuing the same things with similar experiences. And I know that that's the ship story, from kind of the ground up. And being a part of SHIP now for a couple of years, just being to my second conference, that feeling has grown and caught fire, I think, in so many places to the point where, especially at convention, is this huge inferno of passion and motion and just drive. And it's a really great thing, especially hearing stories like yours where they all start in a similar way of just being introduced to this new expanding familia and the power that that has working all together. And so then this is a ship chapter. You then continued to do. So
Yeah,
you were
so
part of this.
yeah, so in terms of my path, I was an active member for the 5 years that I was in school,
Mhm.
and and then once I graduated, I moved to Colorado to work for an interesting company. I just talked about nuclear, but the company I wanted to work for was called Rocky Flats. It was run by Rockwell International, and their focus was actually making triggers for nuclear weapons.
Okay.
So it's funny how life goes when you have a certain path that you think you're going to take, but then it kind of there's a slight pivot. And the way I came into this opportunity again was thankfully through SHIP. So we, as part of our annual events, we held a career conference.
Mm.
And during that career conference, I met a bunch of different companies and I interviewed for this one company, Rockwell International. They had a plant they were managing in Colorado, and I got a summer internship. And so I went and worked there that summer, had a great experience. I worked as a facilities engineer. So not necessarily working around silicon, but more as a facilities engineer. And I kind of liked it. It was kind of fun, getting to walk through the plant and kind of, you know, detail out, any kind of electrical work that had to be done if we're doing any renovations or such. So, being an intern, I didn't have a huge amount of authority, but I got to work closely with a lot of those engineers and kind of follow them and kind of see what they were doing. And so when I graduated from college, I got an offer and I liked Colorado enough. I was like, this is a great place. It's close to New Mexico. I can go home. It's 5.5 hour drive. I can still see my mom and dad, but yet it's the big city of Denver. Denver's a huge city compared to Albuquerque. It still is, of course.
I failed to mention
And
this
for
to you.
me,
I live in Denver, so uh I can
yeah.
support everything you're
So,
saying.
so when I worked as an intern, I lived in Boulder. Boulder's a
Mm.
beautiful place right by Folsom Field. I used to go play the
Wow,
football in
yeah.
Folsom Field, played in their gym for intramural basketball. But so then when I moved back, uh, I lived in Westminster, Arvada area, and that's where I ended up staying for that 5.5 years or so. So was in that big area. So my commute to work is beautiful. I go
Yeah.
against the Flatirons and I would see that beautiful view every day. It was a great experience for me. Um, but I still had a hunger. I still had a
Mm.
hunger a little bit. I enjoyed the work that I was doing. I enjoyed the people I was doing, but I knew that there was more in Leonard's path. And so I started taking some classes at the University of Colorado at Boulder, and kind of more like I was going to pursue like a master's degree in engineering, like an engineering management degree. But I was like, I'm not sure if that's going to get me where I need to be. And this one person, his name is Rick Abercrombie. Uh, he One day we were walking through a building, and we're having a conversation. I was walking. He's like, Leonard, I'm 37 years old and I have a master's degree, and this is as good as it gets. And he goes, I've been around you for a little while, and you're a pretty smart guy. I have higher aspirations for you. You should think about something else besides just an engineering degree. You should combine that with something else. And so that got me to thinking, and I was like, yeah, well, what could it be? And I was like, if I want to get to where I want to be, maybe I should pair this engineering degree, which is a beautiful foundational degree, with something else. And for me, the logical degree was an MBA. I looked at accounting and all these other disciplines, and I was like, MBA sounds pretty good as well. And then, coming from a poor community, part of my decision making is also based on income and how much money I make, right? Even when I went into electrical engineering, I should have mentioned this earlier, but when I looked at all the different disciplines, electrical engineering was one of the best in terms of starting salary when you first get out of school. So I looked at that because, my parents were very low income and still are today, unfortunately. So I knew that whatever I got into had to provide me with a great return on investment. And so I got a leave of absence from AG&G Rocky Flats, which is what it was now called, because another company was managing it. And went to school for the next 2 years.
And I love the idea of, so, I mean, you're not turning your back on your engineering degree. You're saying, how can I use you? It's a great foundational degree. How can I pair this? What's the best way to take this and continue to move forward to better myself, better my career, better my future, and, I could be a part of creating that generational wealth that you weren't able to get from your parents, and so start to change the tides, right? And so what was it about getting your MBA that you felt paired really well with your engineering degree?
Yeah, great question. So, and it's a pretty easy answer. So in engineering, it's all quantifiable data. The answer is 4.3. The answer is 289. When you go for an MBA, it's all qualitative data. So of course they use quantitative data to provide a baseline to help you make that qualitative decision. So for me, it was a perfect marriage because I felt I was lacking in my qualitative skills. All my electives at school were engineering related electives. So I didn't really have a chance to take, art appreciation, which I wish I had because I've been to pretty much every major museum around the world and seen great artwork, and would appreciate it a little bit more if I had studied it. But I think that was the perfect pairing to get that qualitative and that quantitative approach. It would make me a better individual no matter which company I work for.
Yeah. And then talk to me about your involvement with SHIP now at this point in time as you're going for your MBA and continuing your career path. How was SHIP involved, and what was your involvement with SHIP?
Yeah. So that's what I did. Take a break from SHIP at that point. So I took probably a 3-year break. So I was an active member from, the late 1980s through 1993, went back for my MBA in 1993, graduated in 1995. And then at that point, I kind of resumed my path with SHIP because, at school, I didn't have any time. Again, it's one of those, I went to University of Texas, the top 20 program, pretty hard. I mean, I remember sitting there day of school in the big auditorium, and the dean is up there telling us, look to your left, look to your right. One of you won't be here next year.
Yeah.
And he was trick. I mean, I saw a number of my peers drop out. Again, what is this one guy from this little small community doing here in this big state of Texas in this top 20 program? those thoughts would have crossed my head, and how am I going to pay for it? Right. I mean,
Mm,
sure, I was making engineering money, but the program was a pretty costly program. I didn't
yeah,
get too much assistance. So I had to work through that challenge.
right. And so then what brought you back into SHIP then? You said you took 3 years off, which implies that you came back, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think when I went back, there was a conference in Denver at that time. And so I got to go back to Denver, see some of my old friends, and that kind of got me remotivated to kind of go back into SHIP. And I had developed some really close friendships with, Diana Gomez and Melissa Drake and Manny Hernandez and some of those folks. And so, because I was just fresh out of school with my MBA, it kind of made sense for me to kind of think about SHIP in a different way. And one of the projects I got assigned to, or they asked me to participate in, was process improvement and things like that. How can we put together a better conference? Because it seemed like every year we're putting together this national conference, but it was almost like Groundhog Day. We're like, okay, well, what do we do? Nothing was really documented.
Mm,
And that's been one of my strengths, is kind of process improvement and documentation. And so I volunteer to kind of help document the financial career conference, and kind of just put everything on paper and then look at ways that we can improve that.
yeah, I love, I love the way you said you got assigned to, and then you backtrack and say, "Oh, well, they asked me," because I know they asked you, but they weren't really asking. It was a foregone conclusion that you were gonna do it, it sounds like. It's
Yeah.
just knowing how SHIP works, and I don't mean that negatively. I just mean that, like, there's just a way that I feel like, like, "Okay, this is something I'm supposed to do." And so tell me about your involvement then planning for the national conference. So that was when you connected with them in Denver. When was the first conference that you ended up working on?
I don't, but I think I want to say was Chicago was the next conference. And so that's when I kind of took on this special project, and kind of went through and kind of documented the conference, and it worked very closely with the National Board of Directors to try
Mhm.
to incorporate some of these things. And it ended up paying off in spades, because, over the course of the last, 30 years, we've gone from, 3,000 person conference to, I don't know, 12,500 or whatever the last
Right.
numbers were. Um, it's grown significantly over the years. We've tried different models in terms of how we manage the conference. We tried, where we were internally running the conference with the SHIP staff. And then we hired a third party, but it didn't really matter as to who we hired or what we did. We just had to document it. So that
Right.
was my thing, was documenting it. And then looking at some low hanging fruit, right? We always relied on SHIP volunteers to kind of help us.
Mhm.
And I remember going to a Nishimba conference, and I was amazed at how many volunteers they had and how well run it was compared to our conference at the time. And so I ended up meeting with a number of board of directors for Nishimba, and I was like, hey, so how do you get all these volunteers, and what's the process that you
Mm.
guys use? And so, yeah, they shared with me some of the details of what they were doing. And then I reached out to Maya's, and kind of asked them the same type of question. And then what I ended up doing was putting together a new volunteer program. And if we think about how it was run before, we used to use kind of like a spreadsheet, right? And send me an email if you want to volunteer between the hours of 2 o'clock in the afternoon to 5 o'clock in the afternoon to support this one event. It was very much email and spreadsheet centric.
Yeah.
And I was like, you know what? This just doesn't work. So I, I incorporated those processes from these other organizations and kind of merged them together and kind of created one that I thought would work for SHIP, which, as far as I know, is the process still being used today to gather volunteers. We just made it easier. I contracted with a third party. I got them to build out a website. People go into the website, grab a slot, and the more times they volunteer, the greater chances they got to win prizes, um, or earn gift certificates
Mm.
and such. And so, I think 2 years ago when I checked in with Alex, he was using the same system. So that's good. So I probably should talk to him a little bit about, hopefully he's thought about putting that on mobile and making that and updating that as well. But those are some of the process improvements we made that really helped us to grow as a ship organization, and the conference is growing.
Yeah.
And it was about putting together a great customer experience. And for me, the customers were other professionals that are attending and then students. And that's something I got from MBA school was, be obsessed with customers, make sure the customers have a great experience so they come back and they want to be members of SHPE and they want to continue coming back to the conference year after year.
Yeah. And I think that's such a great way to apply kind of your experience and your education that you got there towards what part of what got you to where you were in the first place. Being involved with SHPE and other organizations was very, very meaningful to you in terms of getting through your educational career and then landing jobs and things of that nature. And so I love that you can go out, you're pairing your engineering degree with your MBA, and then you take all of that experience and knowledge and apply it back towards, okay, so how can we continue to impact more Hispanics in STEM fields, more Hispanic engineers, more young members, professionals and students. And I think that's, that mindset I think is so telling of really the growth and success of not only SHPE, but the conference, in particular. The having just come from there, I've been corrected several times. So I can say the number I'm supposed to quote is 12,500 plus members who are in attendance, biggest conference ever until next year in LA for the 50th. But
Yep.
it's so great to hear some of the really like nitty gritty stuff that goes on behind the scenes, because there's so many of you who are putting in this kind of work and effort to change systems and processes to serve the members of SHPE, to serve that familia. And I think, you can't be at something like convention and not recognize how much work goes into it because of especially the scale that it's on now and how well it's done and how smoothly everything ends up going. I know it feels chaotic at the time, but it's really, I'm always incredibly impressed by the staff and the volunteers who put all that on. And you are not the first person to mention the how invaluable the volunteers are. So I always want to make sure that we have a chance to say that for anyone who's wanting to volunteer, you are the heartbeat of those events. And that's something that I've heard echoed through so many people that I've talked to who have been a part of putting these conferences on in the past. And so I just wanted to highlight that point that you brought up as well. And so then you ended up being, you at this point involved with SHPE for years, end up on the board of directors. Is that right?
Yeah. So, I was actually on the board of directors before I went to grad school. So,
Oh, great.
so after I graduated from college, that's when I joined the professor chapter, and then I served on the board for 3 years. And then when I went to grad school, took a little bit of a break, and then I joined back on. I didn't know if that ever left, but
Right.
I got re-engaged.
Yes.
And then really for the next between 1995 to 2010, I was involved in helping with every year's conference. So I went pretty much to every conference in that span of time. And it culminated finally in the year 2010 when I was asked to chair the 2010 conference in Cincinnati. And it made sense for me to finally do that because, I had been a pretty active member. I had volunteered and worked in different subcommittees. I'd worked as I mentioned, recreating or establishing the volunteer program.
Mm-hmm.
And then I worked in registration, actually in what conference was this? There was a conference at Philly. Yeah. In conference at Philly. And this is how I've always been involved with SHPE, right? So sometimes I'm not necessarily planning to be super active in helping, but then it always comes back saying, hey, Leonard, we just found out that the engineering challenge that we had set up for Philadelphia, the folks who are going to do that program dropped out. It's basically a week and a half before the conference. So now we have
hear
this
their panic
gap.
over the phone.
Yeah, we have this huge gap. And it's like, okay, what do you mean, you guys? What do we have to do? And well, we need you to put together a 24-hour program for like an engineering challenge. So basically you're presented with a problem, the teams get a set of tools and supplies, and they go on their way and they build out a solution, and they come back and they present.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, oh boy. So first thing I did, of course, is I called some of my peers that I work with, Mike Cruz and some other folks that were longtime ship members. And I said, hey, can you guys help me? So it was going to be, I couldn't do it by myself either. This was a big task.
Yeah.
And so we put together what we called the Ultimate Ship Challenge. So, and we did that in Philadelphia. That was back in 2007. And that's kind of a fun thing, right? We basically gave the students less than 20 hours to put together a plan to meet the challenge, right? And here the challenge was, this is the funny challenge. So the scenario is, it's the 14th century. The year is 1305, and King Leonard, King Leonard the First of Ship and his men had laid siege on Maya's castle. Battle was raging on. 50 of the king's most skilled carpenters and engineers had been summoned to quietly change the course of this medieval siege warfare. A new weapon must be developed to destroy the wall defenses of the castle in order for the king's army to advance over the castle's fortifications. All these simple tools and available supplies are to be used to construct this new weapon. So, I gave them kind of a script, and I gave them some different things that they could use or could not use, but I didn't tell them what the weapon was.
Mm-hmm.
So they had to kind of think about it. Of course, I secretly wanted them to build like a catapult, right? That was really what we were trying to get them to build. So I wanted them to come to the conclusion that to break through and take over this castle, they'd have to build a series of catapults. And so that was the project. And I remember going to Mike and I taking the rental car over to Home Depot and loading up the rental car with a bunch of plywood and all kinds of things. Again, this is all at the very, very last minute to try to make this event go. I mean, and we had big sponsors that are kind of relying on this, right? I mean, we had like Chevron, Ford, Intel, the Navy, Johnson & Johnson. We couldn't let these guys go. We couldn't let them down. So we provided this framework. The teams went and worked, and then we'd have check-in meetings throughout the night and early morning. And then as we neared the end of the project, they came in and they made a presentation on what their solution was to, conquer the castle. And then they have to show us what they could do. And then, we did some measurements in terms of how far the catapult could send something flying over and things like that. So it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So
I've heard
these kind of experiences were my favorite things about working the organization and getting to engage with students.
I've heard such great stories of some of the design challenge and the engineering challenges, and I know there are so many now that just happened at convention, and there's big prizes involved and huge, really, like, again, big sponsors sponsoring these events. I also love, playing to the storyteller in me, the whole setup that you gave, giving it kind of context and, drama involved, and which I think makes it fun, right? And so they're there at convention. They're there to have fun. They're there to show what they can do. And I love the way you set that up for them. Can you tell me a little bit about the value of some of these engineering challenges and competitions and why we should have more members who are interested in doing this? What's the benefit to them?
Yeah. For me, it is exactly what they're going to encounter when they eventually leave school, right? So even today in my job, I may go in and I work today as a consultant, a technology consultant. So I have my own company and I go in and work for these different clients. But I work with a long list of people, right? So I work with other project managers, program managers, devs, you name it. So really what this whole project did or does really is get them used to working with other people under high stress environments and with the mission. That's really what it is you have a short time frame, limited resources, don't exactly know where you're going, but you need to get there. And so, and that's sometimes what it is in real life, right? You know that you're trying to figure out, okay, why is my service not bringing in the right number of subscribers?
Mhm.
That's all you know. So then the team has to kind of band together and kind of figure out, okay, how do we get to the root cause of what's causing these issues, and what kind of plans can we put into play to kind of bring back more subscribers for our service? And so I thought that these kind of programs were excellent in terms of getting students together to really start fundamentally building those team building skills and relationships that they would probably have lifelong based on that experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing all of that. I know we've talked about several different things involving kind of the growth of SHIP during a period of time there. But I wanted to open up to give you ask a little bit more broadly, give you a little bit more freedom in answering this question. During the period of time you spent over a decade working with SHIP, uh, even the time you said you took off, and this is what everyone says, and I love pointing it out, you were never gone. You were just on your way back. And I think that's how everyone feels in SHIP. And I think that speaks to the culture that no one leaves. Everyone's just on their way back. And so during the period of time that you spent with them, we're here talking about SHIP's 50th anniversary, 50 years of serving Hispanic students and professionals in STEM. And you were there for a lot of that, a big period of time, and a big period of time investing into the Familia, into the organization, into the members. What are some ways that you saw SHIP grow during that period of time that you haven't had the chance to talk about yet?
Yeah, actually, there's a lot. I mean, there's a long
Oh,
list of
yeah.
things, but just to kind of keep it shorter, when I was on the board, back in the '90s, there was this debate. We had a SHIP newsletter that would go out. Again, you have to think about the timeline, right? This was before the wide world web was really out there. People didn't carry cell phones so much in their pockets at that time. So the way that uh, people consumed information was still paper. So
Mhm.
SHIP would send out a newsletter and mail it to your house or mail it to the school, and there'd be a stack of newsletters at school, and then you could read through what was happening. And I thought that was great, but I thought, we're growing as an organization. We should think about this differently. And looked at other sister organizations, and Ray Miado, who was part of HENAC, he was an incredible person. He was doing some things that I thought we should do, and I mean, so we partnered with him to kind of put out a SHIP magazine,
Hmm.
and it really helped us to kind of make us look a little bit more professional, because again, we were trying to encourage companies to invest in SHIP at that time. And so having a little bit more of a professional appearance, improving the ways we communicate with the members was important. So that was one example. Um, we also, again, we were looking at how do we improve the organization as a whole. We kind of had the standard, the SHIP board was kind of really the main governing body of SHIP.
Mhm.
But yet we had as office staff that was kind of managed by the president of SHIP. And really that made it kind of difficult. So at that time, we put our heads together and we're like, okay, let's maybe think about hiring an executive director. And so we did. So we hired the first executive director of SHIP, and that person ended up becoming kind of like kind of helped us to have a more stability in the office and more accountability for the people that worked there. And we had a great staff to begin with, and people that had been there for quite a while. So it was a good group. But I think, like anything else, sometimes you need some new leadership to come in and help challenge the norm and put together some process improvements, etc. So that's what Martin did. So it was a great it was great for the organization to kind of again continue improving the way it was going to work in the future. And then thirdly was the creation of the IPC.
Hmm.
So back in my involvement in those days, we did a lot. We did the SHIP magazine, we did the executive director, we did the IPC, and IPC today is probably the most important aspect of SHIP because that is the lifeblood of our revenue. these are companies that have decided to invest, 50, 60,000, whatever they're investing. I don't even know the numbers now, but they're investing significant dollars into the organization. They want to be part of SHPE. They know that there's a great talent available to them, not just because they have to meet the diversity goals, but because there's great talent available to them. And so that was a way for us to kind of provide benefits to these companies that are going to make an investment. So I think those three contributions that I was part of, to me, are some of the most important contributions that I and my fellow board members made and other peers made during that time, right? So, and then just
Yeah.
continue to the conferences and get us to where we're at today. So,
Absolutely. And I think one thing I wanted to, obviously the creation of IPCs being so important, something that's obviously involved in, again, like you said, sort of a big part of the heartbeat of a lot of what SHPE's doing and why they're able to do it. And then another thing you mentioned, that I also wanted to just touch on real briefly was you saw other sister organizations doing things that you wanted to emulate and learn from. And I think that's a really great perspective. You brought that up in a couple different places now. And I think it's always good to highlight we're not going to we don't want to pretend that SHPE is the only organization that anyone should ever interact with. Obviously, there's lots of people doing lots of great things and we're not competing with them. And I think that, the way you mentioned that come up in this story is, you want to learn from what they're doing, emulate what they're doing, because in a lot of respects, with a lot of these organizations, we're trying to accomplish similar things. And so I think it again speaks to the idea of wanting to improve to serve more people, to properly serve the people that you have now and adapt in those sorts of ways, particularly talking about this change of structure of the organization and how it's being managed. These seem like really small things, but as the organization gets to the size that it was and the size that it is now and the size it's going to be, you have to adapt and you have to prepare. And I think SHPE's done a really good job of doing that because here we are, 2023, biggest conference ever, huge excitement for the future. And it takes a lot of work and a lot of preparation and organization to get us to that point and to keep going. So, speaking a little bit more forward thinking here, what are some things now that over the past 50 years the ship has learned from and got us to this great place, but what are some things that you're really excited about for the next 50 years of SHPE?
yeah. So, there's a lot. I mean, I am very proud of my own daughter. She has followed my path in engineering. She's a member of HESO. She goes to the University of New Mexico. She's majoring in electrical engineering. She's female, so she's helping to break those barriers down. Of course, there's a lot more females that are in engineering today than there was when I first started, but it's still a small number. I mean, I
Mhm.
talked to her today, and there's still not a lot of females that are going in these degrees. So, I think in the next 50 years, I hope that female engineers and the number of female engineers is a non-issue. It's just hey, it's not even talked about because women are pursuing these technical degrees without even thinking about it.
Yeah.
They're not going down another path because they didn't have the confidence. They have lots of role models now. So I mentioned a few folks that I work with in SHPE today, and these are real role models they can look at and say, hey, Dana Gomez, Melissa Drake, and others have done a great job of not only being members of SHPE, but being a leader in SHPE, and not only being an employee at so and so company, but being a leader at that company. So they have real role models they can look at today. So I think in the next 50 years, okay, I would expect us, and I do say expect, I would expect us to
Mhm.
have a strong presence in the technology sector and other fields, even medical and even my own field where I kind of shifted over, right? Because really to get to leadership positions with companies, sure, they value engineering skills and that background, but you also have to have that qualitative skills. You have to understand business. And that's kind of what my MBA brought to me, right? I was like, I never traded a stock in my life and never knew anything about that stuff. And I'm so grateful I bought my Microsoft stock in 1990. I still own. So So, those kind of things, right? It's like, it was great learning lessons for me. And I have high hopes for SHIP that what is seen as a challenge in the past is now a given in terms of strong community, strong talent in these upper boardrooms that are showing that Hispanics can be there just like anybody else can. Why not me?
Why not me? Well, thank you so much for sharing so much of your ship journey. You mentioned now that you own your own company. What is it you're doing?
So, my company's called the Abeyta Group, and basically I work as a technology consultant in program management, product marketing, and project management. And so I work with tech companies. My most recent contract was with Adobe, working as a program manager around their Creative Cloud for Teams business, and kind of helping that team kind of go through their OKR development, go get them ready to kind of uh, present their monthly reporting to the leadership team, their quarterly reporting, helping them put the framework on there. So you might say, well, that doesn't sound very technical. But again, as my career has kind of migrated, right? When I first got out of engineering school, I worked as an engineer hardcore for 5.5 years or so. Got the MBA, went to go work at went to go work at GTE in telecom, and worked as a major account manager. But to be effective in major account management, you have to understand the technology and understand how to talk to customers and figure out what their needs were. And so that's how I was able to kind of do really well in that field. And after I finished that part of my experience, I went to work at a couple startups. And then I eventually went to go work at Microsoft as an FTE. And all those experiences, right, where I went and started up my own company. This is my second company I started up. I had another company called Broadband Mobile, and that company was focused on delivering messages over your phone. Text 12345 and get a coupon delivered to your phone.
Mhm.
So I helped, want some funding for that company, and we raised over $2 million, and then we eventually exited and sold that company off to a third party. And so it was a good success story from our perspective as a company. Then I went to go work at Microsoft and worked there as a director of business development. But again, I was always relying on my technical know-how and my skills, that I always felt confident because I had that engineering degree that I could understand anything
Yeah.
technology related. And then when I went to work at AT&T, I kind of shifted over into product. And I was like, you know what? I need to get away from just pure sales. I need to go back into more of the technology piece. So I went to go work as a product manager at AT&T, launching smartphones. So I can probably say I rolled out about 20 plus smartphones to tens of millions of customers for AT&T over the course of my 6 years there. So working with BlackBerry, with LG and Samsung, Kyocera, you name it, the OEMs at that time. I was
Yeah.
working on helping to launch those devices and putting them in people's pockets and changing the way people communicate.
Yeah. I mean, there's not a single one of us who doesn't have a smartphone in our pockets now. And so that's a big part of shaping the world that we live in right now. And so uh thank you for doing that. I as much as everyone else probably have become very dependent on my phone, and I don't think that's all bad. Obviously, we can have that conversation some other time. But yeah, so really cool things you've been able to work on. And Uh, I just want to really thank you for spending the time to share with us your story and just your journey in STEM and SHIP, and for being a part of making SHIP what it is now over the past 50 years and setting us on the trajectory for where SHIP's going in the next 50 years. So thank you again uh, for spending the time with us today, Leonard, and for again, yeah, just serving SHIP and serving the Familia.
I'd be remiss if I didn't say thank you to my wonderful wife, Liz, who has always been there for me to support me in all these endeavors. We just celebrated our 25-year anniversary. I do have my other daughter, Amanda. I'm so proud of her. She's also pursuing a degree at a local college here as well. So, I appreciate their support over the years. When I was traveling a lot for SHIP, my wife was at home taking care of the kids and such. So, I appreciate her, doing that while I was out.
Yeah.
helping the organization. Final thoughts are, I love SHPE. It's one of the best organizations I've ever belonged to in my life. I enjoyed working closely with Rod and some of the other early stakeholders. I had a personal relationship with Jaime Waka. I went to his house a few times, and getting to meet people like that and the role models that they were my role models, and it was just a wonderful experience for me so far. And I look forward to attending the LA conference in person this next year. So I'll be there.
Wonderful.
God
Well,
willing.
I'm doing everything I can to get invited back so I can see you there. Uh, Thanks again so much, Leonard, and I hope to see you very soon.
All right. Thanks for your time.